Hello, fellow readers. This is Mr. Moyer, and I want to talk to you a little bit today about text structure. So, when we talk about structure, that word is kind of an interesting one because the analogy I tend to use is, with people, you can't see that underneath our skin we've got bones, a skull, our ribs, our ankle bones, our knee bones, or things like that. But that's actually what gives us our shape. So when I make that analogy, what I mean by our text structure is we're really looking at how there's something that's kind of underlying here. So it's a different kind of thinking that we have to do as readers. It's not going to necessarily be an obvious thing. We have to kind of really do a lot of good about the text thinking in order to kind of get a sense for what's really the shape or what's really the purpose, you could say, of this particular kind of text. So that's kind of what we mean by structure. I think if we look at the examples, you'll get a really good feel for what we mean by this. Now, remember, we're talking about particularly nonfiction text structures. So these are nice patterns that we can find and discover in nonfiction. There are basically 5 of them. Description, chronological order, problem and solution, cause and effect, compare and contrast. Let's talk about each of those. So the first one we'll talk about is description. And this basically just is a text that its main feature is about explaining a topic, idea, person, place, or object. And it essentially is done just simply by listing all those characteristics or features. It's definitely an informative kind of piece of writing that's going to give you a lot of information about a particular topic. So identifying the topic right off the bat is a really good idea. And then what you'll kind of get is just essentially a list of features about that topic. So here's a quick paragraph, an example I know I've used in class. You can always pause your video, take a moment to read over it, but I want to analyze this a little bit just as a reader and to really kind of point out some things that we're seeing here and how I would know and recognize why this is a descriptive kind of writing here. So, for example, when we look at this, you could pretty much right from the very get-go understand that all this is doing is simply giving a long list of facts about our topic, which happens to be the United States. Now, the last little bit there in purple that I highlighted is one of those signal words that oftentimes will tip you off maybe that there is a particular text structure that's going on. The word additionally or in addition, as it's kind of listed in our ISN, is helpful because, again, this is a long list of facts. So sometimes authors are pretty good about, changing up how they do their list. But, essentially it is just kind of a long list. So they might break it up with words like that. Our next kind of structure we'll look at is something that is written in chronological order. Big, long, fancy word that just simply means we're putting things in order based on how they happened. So it could be based on time. It could be, think like a recipe, like step 1, step 2 kind of thing. That's what we mean by things being in chronological order. So once again, here's another example. In order to get a good feel for it, I would suggest, again, reading it. You can certainly pause and then unpause and come back and join. But as we analyze this one, the first thing that jumps out to me as a reader is to see that first sentence when it says that crayons, our topic here, have evolved quite a bit over time. Like that over time part is like a super huge keyword to me that just kind of says, oh, now we're going to get something in chronological order. And many of us, when we read this, we looked at that it was very good in this particular text about giving us dates. So we see from the late 1400s to the 1800s to later in the 1800s, a specific date like 1903, talking about over the last 100 years, and then finally arriving the very last part down here is about what crayons are like today. So that's how crayons have changed. Another type of text structure that we'll look at is problem and solution. And this one is easy to recognize for the fact that it presents something that is a problem. And the example that I used in class, the students are like, yeah, this is a problem. They recognized it right away as being a problem. So something is going on. And oftentimes it could be that this type of text is going to present the possible solutions. It could be solutions that people actually have already tried. And the other thing that, this very well might do is it might outline the pros and cons, meaning, what are the benefits of this particular solution, what's working about it, and maybe the cons, like what's negative about it. How is it not maybe necessarily working as a good solution, and do we need other solutions? So the example that we had here was a little bit about vandalism, in which, like I said, my students recognized right away that this was a good example of a problem. And they knew then along came a solution. Now, the first thing I do as a reader, and here's what I kind of mean about some good, I've been using this analogy of zooming in and zooming out. So, in the last case of the last text structure, there were specific words or phrases that really helped me out. So to me, I called that like a zoom in. You were looking at very specific parts of the text. But then this is what I mean by kind of a zoom out, where like as a reader, I begin to see the first part of this text right here. The first part of this paragraph is all about the problem. So everything that you see right there, like I see, okay, the author is setting up the problem for us. All right. Sometimes it's nice for us to do about the text thinking and really say, what is the author doing in this part and how does that fit with the next part? Because like I said, usually in a problem solution kind of structure, you're going to get the problem first, and then you're going to get what is supposed to be the solution. So we see our author here doing that in the last part of the paragraph. Now, particularly, so that's the kind of zoom out, but now I'll zoom in for a second because I really think there's particular parts in there that kind of helped me clue into that this is definitely a problem and solution. They don't use the word problem in there. I had to kind of infer that. But boy, when I see words like I have a plan or I propose, hopefully this plan will stop the vandalism, that definitely tells me we're getting into that solution section. And so I wanted to really kind of identify there that there was a transition from that problem into that solution. And so I can identify that. That's what's going on in this particular writing, is it's problem and solution. Next is cause and effect. Now, don't let this confuse you with problem and solution. And I know a lot of students can be prone to doing that. But essentially what this means is something happens and we want to know what happens as a result of that. So the something that happens is the cause. And then what happens as a result of that is what we call the effect. So here's a good example of one. Very similar to the last one, I'm going to kind of zoom out for a second and say, oh, I recognize at the very beginning of this paragraph, my author is giving us what the cause was. So the something that happened was, in this case, the school board voted to make major changes. They changed the school start time. Then what I recognize is now come the effects. So they tell us that test scores went up. They tell us that they've seen a drop in tardiness. Students seem to be getting to school on time. There seemed to be a lot of positive feedback about students' behavior and attention spans. So these are the things that happened as a result of that change. And once again, okay, so I noticed those two large parts kind of going on, how they work together. But again, if I were zooming in and thinking about, boy, what words or phrases really help me, identify this, we're beginning to see some surprising and welcome results. That results word kind of signals that transition from here was something that happened and here's something that happened as a result of that, right? The effects. So the final one that we'll talk about is compare and contrast. And, many of my students have been very good right off the bat recognizing it. Anytime we're kind of comparing and contrasting, you could use a Venn diagram. So, I know I haven't mentioned a whole lot necessarily about those cool little pictures that are on these slides, but to me, these are like good visual cues that help us kind of remember what exactly are we doing? What exactly can we expect out of the text when we have this particular structure? So you see here, they've got a Venn diagram of 3 different things. Sometimes it's just a simple one. Sometimes it's just comparing and contrasting 2 things, like in our example that we have here, brown bears and black bears. So immediately what I begin to see in this text is that they told us right off the bat what is similar about them, what is different about them. So one of the cool things that I tried to do by highlighting here is identifying all the information that was given about the brown bears and all the information that is about the black bears, color-coded into that yellow for the brown and blue for the black bears. And one of the things that you can do now that I've done that is see that actually in this text structure, sometimes there's like kind of a bouncing back and forth between them. They might talk about one and then they might talk about the other. And then the other thing I tried to do here was to show you in green the ways in which brown bears and black bears are both similar. So there are often times where the author is giving us information that shows how they're alike, not how they're different. So you see that in green. And so again, you see that kind of woven in at beginning, middle, and end kind of this paragraph. So, one of the challenges maybe as a reader is to kind of say, which thing am I talking about here? How do I organize that? And of course, if you wanted to use a Venn diagram as a good graphic organizer to help you to do that, that would be perfect, because that's the way that this text structure is set up. So I want to emphasize, why do we talk about this as readers? Well, first off, knowing the text structure just helps you understand the author's main ideas. They have a particular purpose, and based on that particular purpose, that's why we get the structure that we get. Humans are shaped the way that we're shaped. I'll go back to my analogy about us being, structured by our skeleton. The reason why we're shaped the way that we are is because of who we are and what we're good at doing. We've got a good skull to protect our brain, because boy, our brain is one of the most important features kind of about us. If we were going to be a tiger or a lion, obviously we'd be shaped a little bit different, because we were going to perform differently. We're going to do different things. Our purpose is a little bit different. So, knowing that structure and identifying it and calling it out by its name, saying, yeah, I know that this is descriptive, or I know that this is a problem and solution, really helps you to narrow in on what is that main idea that the author is giving. And of course, like, I said in the last case about the compare contrast, let's say, you had to take notes. Let's say you had to, you were doing research and you wanted to take some of that information with you and put it into your very own project. It helps you understand and maybe even better organize that information. I think it will help you remember it greater. And I think it's more meaningful to you when you actually understand what the author is really trying to do there. I think you'll pick up a lot more from the reading as you do that. So one cool feature that I know our fellow fourth grade teachers have created is a nonfiction text structure survey. Kind of treat it like a little quiz. So there's a link to that, I know, on our Google Classroom if you're a Moyerite. But I greatly appreciate your time, and thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoy your reading, whatever you're reading. Bye now.